Greetings. This is Datalink's Magnus, or Datamag 2018 on Instagram. What I want to do today is I want to introduce the uninitiated to this line, because I'm really loving it, and I think a lot of other people would love it if they could find a way to get their foot in the door. My second goal here is to give information for those of you that know about the line and you're interested in it, but you've probably been hesitant to get involved with it because of economics of the situation, or getting in so late on a line that you don't feel like you'll really be able to appreciate it as much as other people who've been collecting the line for years. I want to touch on that too. I do want to make a disclaimer. I am not a Mythic Legions expert, but I have studied it quite a bit, and I feel like my interpretation, my experience can help those of you that are trying to get into the line. So if you don't know, Mythic Legions were created by a group of guys called the Four Horsemen, and they are famous toy sculptors, toy designers that have worked on many lines in the past couple of decades. They worked on the early Spawn lines. They worked on DC Universe Classics. There's a whole bunch of different figures that they've had their hand in as far as creating the designs and the engineering and the sculpting of figures. So they know what they're doing. They're toy creator veterans. So once upon a time in 2015, or I'm sure it was before that, but this is when they were introduced. In 2015, they introduced this line called Mythic Legions. And it was February of 2015, and they introduced a Kickstarter. And they had 22 figures in the initial Kickstarter that you could get. The Kickstarter was very successful, and it ballooned to 34 figures. These figures were based on mythological medieval archetypes, barbarians, knights, ogres, goblins. Well, I don't think they had goblins just yet, but that type of the Lord of the Rings, sword and shield, sword and sandal archetype. And what they were able to do was create a bunch of figures on their own designs, original sculpts, original, characters. And they created this Kickstarter and they released it, and it was a wild success. So in the initial Kickstarter, again, you had 34 figures that were actually released. You also had 6 weapons packs, anything from a warhammer to a spectacular unique sword to a battle axe to a dagger to a spear, shields, things like that, released with this wave. Some of the highlights here were some of the very iconic figures from Mythic Legions: Attila the Eosir, Atlas the Conqueror, Carpathius the Vampire, Otho, Malleus, Sir Ignatius, Sir Gideon Heavensbrand, Scapular the Cryptbreaker. Some of these figures that are now holy grails, ones that people are really trying to find or get now that they can't, or they can get, but it's going to cost them hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Those figures were released in that first 1.0 wave. And this became known as Mythic Legions 1.0. This was the initial start of the line. And because the Kickstarter was so successful, they were able to continue this line with the subsequent releases. Very quickly after Mythic Legions 1.0, Four Horsemen, bolstered by their success from 1.0, released something called Aetherwing's Dozen. And these were bird-like animal-type humanoids that fit in with the line. These were not technically Mythic Legions characters, but they were based on earlier Kickstarters that the Four Horsemen had done, and they went ahead and included them because they did fit with the line per se. All of these characters had like bird features. They were based on different types of birds. The key or the highlight of this particular wave, though, was the bird Aetherwing, which is a eagle type humanoid, because Aetherwing was written into the mythos of Mythos, or the lore of Mythos, as one of the four bestial demigods that spawned the different factions that we see in today's world of Mythos. And Mythos is the land that all the Mythic Legions characters dwell in. So this was important, maybe not for all the other extra bird characters, but for Aetherwing himself. If you were able to get this one, you had one of the quote-unquote gods of this lore. And then after that, they also released, and these were coming hot on each other's heels, it looks like. You had Mythic Legions 1.5, which was a 6-figure wave, and you had Covenant of Shadows, which was an 8-figure wave. And you have Forest Troll, Pixis, Sir Godfrey, the Stone Troll, which are these huge monstrous figures in that next wave. And then you also had in the subsequent wave another Minotaur type character, Baron Voligar, Kador, Gorthok. A lot of these figures are hard to get now. They're expensive on the secondary market. You can't find them, or if you can find them, they're multiple hundreds of dollars. That brings us to All-Star 1. So All-Stars are a chance for people who maybe got into the line late and want to pick up some of the previously released characters. And I'm not sure how it used to work, but what it's been doing now is they kind of release some that they know people are going to want, and then they put some other ones up for a vote. And you can go online and you basically vote, and whichever ones win the vote, they get put into the All-Star line. So we had All-Star 1. All-Star 1 released 6 characters that were from previous waves that they had determined, I guess, or either that got voted on that people wanted. Asterion, the Barbarian Builder, Orange Steelhide, Sir Gideon Heavensbrand, Sir Ignatius, and Scapular the Crypt Breaker. These figures were made available. You could go and pre-order them on the Four Horsemen's website, and you could get these figures that maybe you missed out on. Me personally, and this is just me talking about my own experiences, I had no idea what Mythic Legions even were when all this was going on. So not only was I late to the party, I was so late that I missed the late sales. And I had to pay for it eventually, which we'll discuss later. But the point is that if you were in from the beginning, it was very easy to get into this line. Those of us that have found out about it late and are trying to get in, it's a little bit more of a struggle for us. We got to be a little bit more strategic about what we get, what we look for, how we look for it. And that is what I want to try to talk about today. So the next wave that was released was their second actual Kickstarter from a Mythic Legions Kickstarter. And it was called Advent of Decay. This was a ginormous wave. There were 43 characters or figures that you could get. 43. So, and just so we know, just so everybody knows what I'm talking about, Mythic Legions pre-orders are different from pre-orders from like Big Bad Toy Store or Empire Toys or Megalopolis or Hasbro Pulse or whatever the case. Like, when you do pre-orders at these companies, you are saying that you want to get something, but you don't pay anything up front. Or if you do pay anything, it's $5 or $10 or $20 or $30 or something like that. With Mythic Legions, you pay full price for each figure as a pre-order. So you are paying full price for the figures that you're not going to see for upwards of 8 to 12 months. It's hard for a collector, and I'm speaking from experience, it's hard for a collector to put down that kind of money and not see your figures for almost a year. It just is. I know how we are. We like to pay for stuff and get it as quickly as possible. And even if we're paying less for something, the fact that we're going to get it months and months and months down the road is very discouraging. It's very easy to rationalize, you know what, I'm not going to pay for that right now. I'll wait till it actually comes out and then I'll buy it then. Yes, there'll be an upcharge, but I'll just wait. That's not the smart way to go about it, but I understand the thinking there, because I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm not independently wealthy. So I don't have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars just laying around to buy 43 figures at $35 a piece on a whim. So when you're trying to get into this line, you have to think strategically, and you have to be able to be disciplined enough to pay the lower rate early and get the figures late, rather than paying the late tax late and getting the figures relatively soon. Some of the highlights, in my opinion, of the advent of Decay wave, and there's quite a few. One of the big revolutions, or one of the big milestones here, was that they started to release what people refer to as the 2.0 body. That is females who are, more slight of build, and elves, dark elves, goblins, figures that are a little bit smaller on the build, on their body proportions. For the most part, the 1.0 wave, the 1.5 wave, things like that, a lot of those figures were big, bulky knights or barbarians or orcs or demons. This line, Kickstarter Advent of Decay, had a lot of the more slender body types. But like I said, there was 43 figures, so you had a lot to choose from. Not everybody went all in, and you can understand why. 43 figures, that's a lot of figures to go all in on. Yes, the Legion builders were a little bit cheaper than the regular figures, and just as an aside, the way the pricing structure is set up with Mythic Legions, if it's a regular named character, like a specific character, those characters will run you about $35 on a pre-order or on a Kickstarter. Legion builders run you about $22. Those are the ones that are kind of generic, not richly painted. Those ones are relatively cheaper. And then there are some mixed in there that are like deluxe figures, and those ones might be a little bit more than $35. So in essence, they're not that different from normal 6 to 7 inch figures. They might be a little bit higher than your Marvel Legend or your McFarlane Toys or something like that. But $35, 20 something dollars for a figure is not a big deal. However, if you wait and you want to get them from Big Bad Toy Store or something like that, you're looking at $50 for named figures and $40 for Legion builders. Pretty big difference. So it looks like they've decided to keep the waves manageable. So after Advent of Decay, every wave that have come out since then has been way less figures. Way less. Okay? So the next wave they came out with was the Colosseum wave. 8 figures. Much more manageable budget-wise, economics-wise, than a 43 wave juggernaut of a release like Advent of Decay. So you had the Colosseum wave, you had 8 figures there. This one was kind of accentuating or introducing the idea that there was this gladiatorial area of Mythos, the land of Mythos, and there was tons of characters that fought in these arenas and turned into either bad guys or heroes after the arena was shut down or whatever the case. And I haven't mentioned this yet, and I'll mention it now, but throughout a lot of these waves, you will notice, or maybe you won't, but there are very specific tribute characters that go to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. In this particular wave, you had Atamon, who basically looks like Atlas the Conqueror, but with blonde hair and kind of resembles a realistic barbarian He-Man. And then you also had Keltis, which is a tribute to Skeletor. And in previous and subsequent waves, we'll also see more of these Master of the Universe tribute characters. And that's something that they throw in every now and again for people who really like those characters. And the Four Horsemen worked on Master of the Universe classics, so they have affinity to that property.